Destiny. I struggle with finding the right words to start this video. Destiny is a game that most gamers have a strong opinion about. Whether you enjoyed it or found it disappointing, I think we can all agree that Destiny had a huge amount of promise. Today I'd like to talk about my personal experience with the game and my thoughts on the franchise. I think that in order to understand Destiny, you need to look at the game through the frame of how it was advertised and promoted. I first learned about Destiny from an article in Game Informer. I love co-op shooters, and planet hopping with some friends sounded like a lot of fun. The article only showed 3 planets, but this was just a preview, so there would be more, right? As I followed the game over the coming months, most articles, interviews, and previews showed very little, but teased a huge adventure that would have you traveling the solar system. Little did we know, but those early articles told us everything that would be in the game. All the classes, enemies, locations, and weapon types. I don't think Bungie flat out lied to us about the amount of content in the game, but they definitely implied something bigger, and the media ran with it. Something that really fed into this was Bungie's insistence on referring to Destiny as a hobby in itself. To the developers, players would not be playing a game, they were living the Destiny experience. Destiny would appeal to all customers, hardcore gamers, casual gamers, non-gamers, those who only play PvP, RPG lovers. It was to be played alone or with friends, young or old, all were invited. Destiny was an experience meant for everyone. In fact, even now you will rarely hear Bungie refer to Destiny as a game. While I admire the faith the developers had in this project, it's easy to see how our vision of Destiny became something so massive it could never live up to the hype. I finally got a taste of the Destiny experience on July 17, 2014 in the open beta on PlayStation 4. To this day, it was possibly the best beta I've ever taken part in. There was a ton to do. There were several missions, strike, PvP. Exploring the Cosmodrome was a blast. The moment-to-moment gameplay felt great, and finding all the hidden secrets was exhilarating. My friends and I played as much as we could during this time, running and rerunning the missions, trying to sneak into areas where the enemies could one-shot us, and exploiting a glitch that would allow us to launch each other with our sparrows. I couldn't believe how much content they put into just the beta, and looking back, I still can't believe it. Mainly because that beta comprised about a fourth of the game. And so, I eagerly awaited over the next few months for the release. I think it's important to note that Destiny engaged in some of the worst pre-order culture. While I don't think there's anything wrong with rewarding customers for putting their trust in your product, there was such an incredible push for buying the game early. There were bonuses for pre-ordering exclusively from GameStop, pre-ordering for PlayStation, and even pre-ordering Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. Yeah, you got something for pre-ordering a different game. There was also PlayStation exclusive content, and while I was on the receiving end, it kind of felt like Bungie made that deal to make a cynical stab at Microsoft. Early on, they also began advertising the expansion pass as the only way to get the full Destiny experience. When the time finally came to purchase Destiny, I bought the game for $60, the expansion pass for $35, and also bought the hardcover strategy guide for I think about $40. I spent around $130 at launch, because I had a lot of hope. Just a side note about that guide, it was utterly useless. I bought it hoping to use it after exploring the game, in hopes that it would help me find hidden secrets and all the things I missed. I guess that Bungie was secretive even with them, because the book was incredibly vague, missing a lot of content that was present at launch. The only redeeming thing it had going for it were a few pieces of concept art. But now I finally owned a copy of Destiny. I'd like to talk about the game in its initial state by first talking about all the things that I enjoyed. and then all the disappointing aspects. This isn't an in-depth analysis, but just how I felt and my thoughts and experiences. A game for everyone. It's important to remember that Destiny was meant to unite all types of players. I don't think I've seen everyone on my friends list all playing the same game since Destiny. My co-op friends, my versus rivals, everyone was on. I think Destiny was largely successful in making a game that appealed to a large demographic. This was important to me because I have a lot of social anxiety and seldom accept friend requests from people I haven't met in real life. Knowing that so many of my friends were all in one place was comforting. The world. I think there are only a few modern games that felt as much fun to explore as Destiny. There were so many little details in the map, and finding new locations while out on patrol was exciting. From Earth's decayed feel to the claustrophobic tunnels of the moon and Venus's dazzling twilight, the worlds were great to traverse, dripping with atmospheric beauty. The locations told story. In fact, there was a great deal of lore for those who were willing to look for it. I love that the items had snippets of info that tied them to the world, much like Dark Souls. I even enjoyed the ambiguous nature of the game's plot, even if it was a bit short. In fact, I didn't mind how short the main quest line was, although I would have liked to hear those stories that scared the children. Speaker! There were some really cool moments that were done without cutscenes or set pieces, such as when in the hive, your motion sensor would show enemies prowling just out of sight, or when the Vex appeared on your sensor for only a moment. I don't think I've seen that done in any other game before or since. PvP. I loved the large maps Destiny originally had. It was awesome to go out with your 6-man squad and battle across the moon or an open canyon, hopping on your sparrows to reach distant control points and dodging the pikes and snipers along the way. I'm not super competitive, so I usually don't care too much about PvP, but I like the size and scale originally offered. Plus, wiping out the enemy team with an ult was a rush. Character specialization. While there wasn't much you could do for your character cosmetically, there were so many ways to define your role through character abilities, class modifiers, and gear. I made my hunter a sort of battlefield medic, blinking across the environment and using invisibility to revive fallen allies, and could bring them up even faster with my exotic chest piece. And if something else were needed, I could easily make the adjustments to entirely change my role. I liked how even the benefits on your gear could be customized. It was nice. Game feel. Destiny just felt good to play. The gunplay was excellent, melee attacks hit hard, and movement was quick and nimble. I think out of everything Destiny did right, it was this that was the most critical of them all. The interface was simple and objectives easy to identify. The enemy programming was incredible. For example, during the beta I climbed on a box out of reach of the swarming thralls. When they saw that I was out of reach, they scattered to cover, hiding in the shadows where I couldn't hit them. As soon as I got within their reach, they pounced. It was this interactivity of the enemies that made them feel smart. I liked how players could gain experience through completing bounties in their preferred mode of play, PvE or PvP. This meant your character and your gear could quickly grow doing what you enjoy most. I'll say it again, Destiny felt good to play. While it may have felt good, there were a lot of things that nagged at the player and brought the game down. Lack of content. When I hear people complain about why Destiny was disappointing, usually they say it's because of the short length of the story. I didn't have much problem with the lack of cinematics or expository dialogue, although most of the dialogue was undisguised yet still somehow vague exposition. No, what really disappointed me was the lack of things to do. There were only the 3 planets and the moon, and while filled with fun things to find, once you've found them, there's not much else to do. There were a few missions, and most of them were pretty repetitive. Go to the waypoint, scan the thing, wait, shoot enemies, wait for scanning to end, and then the mission is over. Bosses were mainly just bigger versions of normal enemies. I don't care if it has the title of Dr. Baron, Lord King Emperor Duke Baker. It fights like any other fallen captain. While the different races felt unique enough aesthetically, they all fought pretty similarly. The exception perhaps being the Hive. PvP only had a few modes to play, and they were all very standard. There were no modifiers, custom matches, or anything to really make it playable for a long period of time. One of the biggest disappointments for me was the lack of weapon variety. You only had a handful of weapon types, and while they all felt good to shoot, there wasn't much originality to them, just the basic military guns. It may not be fair to compare Destiny to Bungie's previous title, Halo, but I can't help but feel like they didn't put the same amount of imagination into it. Halo had so many unique and iconic guns: the Needler, the Spartan Laser, the Brute Shot, the Energy Sword, the Gravity Hammer. I haven't played Halo in a long time, but I remember those weapons, and I remember how much fun they were. I remember the low-gravity, swords-only matches I played with friends. I remember the games of Juggernaut where everyone but the Juggernaut were invisible. I can only name a couple of Destiny weapons, and definitely don't remember individual matches. The only difference between weapons in Destiny was the numerical amount of damage they did. Where were the cool alien guns? Where was the unique technology the Traveler showed us? Why were we using 20th century guns? Repetition and grinding. This may just be spillover from the last point, but I feel like Destiny's systems all funnel you into grinding. Once you finish the game, you replay missions for loot. You complete bounties to level up that loot. You pick up more engrams along the way. You pray that those engrams have loot worth keeping. You play the daily and weekly missions to gain marks. You spend the marks on gear that you then level up with more bounties. It's not the worst cycle I've ever seen, but it got old quickly. It certainly didn't help that the game was very stingy at rewarding you. Glimmer, the currency of Destiny, was easy enough to obtain, but there wasn't a whole lot to spend it on. Brown and gray shaders for your armor, guns that always seemed under-leveled. Most of the time, Glimmer went towards leveling up your armor, which is kind of a dumb mechanic, which leads us to broken mechanics. The most ranted about thing in all of Destiny is the Cryptarch. In order to obtain new gear from missions, you would obtain engrams from fallen enemies or as a reward for completion. These engrams were given to the Cryptarch, who then gave you a random piece of gear depending on the rarity of the engram. Or at least, that's how it was meant to work. Mainly you just got back crappy and useless items, regardless of the engram's rarity. Given the repetitive actions required to acquire said engrams, it's no wonder that players opted to just shoot into a cave for a few hours. Another way of finding rare loot were through exotic bounties. Exotic bounties were unique bounties that required the player to perform difficult tasks in order to receive some of the more rare items in the game. Some of these bounties required luck to complete them, such as very specific kills with limited ammo weapons in PvP, or waiting for an enemy who has a low chance of appearing in a mission. Most of the exotic bounties weren't too bad, some even including unique quests, but some were just egregious though. Oh, the grenades were definitely broken. Baddies could just crouch where they were and they'd be immune to the explosion. I once saw a bad guy bend over the grenade and didn't touch him. Also, hunter grenades suck. They were useless. The history of Destiny after launch was interesting. I feel like the game was always in flux. A very small team at Bungie was in charge of balancing, and they were always changing things. It felt like the game was never in a state of completion. We were always told to expect big things in the upcoming patches. All that really changed most of the time were the damage values of guns. When a high-level gun showed itself to be too powerful in PvP, a tweak to that type of gun was made. Not a tweak to that gun specifically, but to all the guns in that family. Assault rifle too strong? Dial them all back. Thorn winning too many matches? Lower the damage on all hand cannons. Hunter grenades not killing anyone? Well, leave those alone. Other things always being tweaked were the Cryptarch values, though he never felt fixed, and slight changes to missions. These mission changes always seemed weird to me. They liked to make it so if players ever found strategic spots to stand their ground, enemies would spawn on top of them. It made me wonder why certain places had cover if you weren't allowed to stand there for more than half a second. Even stranger, most exploit spots were not changed. The most harmful change from patches, in my opinion, came from the removal of the large maps from PvP. This meant that the smaller, more frantic maps were played more frequently, but I liked those big maps. Some of the pre-DLC highlights of post-launch Destiny were its events. The first event was the Iron Banner, where players fought without limits. No longer would everyone be the same strength in PvP. Levels would matter, weapons and armor would matter. At least, that's what it was supposed to be. I was repeatedly insta-killed by a level 2 guy in my first match. I was max level. Apparently they not only scaled things, but flipped it. I kid you not, Bungie was surprised that players wanted what they were promised. Future Iron Banners were never that bad, but it was a long time and multiple DLCs later until we got our true no bars grudge match. The second event was the Queen's Wrath. This event had players seeking out specific enemies and hunting them down for the Awoken Queen. To this day, this was my favorite event. I liked that you had to use your knowledge of missions, areas, and the named enemies to find your prey. These felt like true bounties. The rewards were cool, including a shader and unique-looking armor. While it had problems like killed enemies not counting towards every member of your team's bounty, and getting the same bounties almost every day, it was still fun. This event was meant to occur regularly, like the Iron Banner, but they only ever did it once. Fortunately, it would be repurposed as the bounties of the House of Wolves DLC. I would be remiss to forget one of Destiny's coolest post-launch features, the Raid. The Vault of Glass was a unique mission where 6 Guardians tested their might and wits against enemy encounters that felt more akin to puzzles. Bungie kept this under tight lock and key, allowing the players to explore and figure out how to progress on their own. I especially liked the platforming sections. Every attempt was a feat. You were only awarded once per week as well. I must admit, I never did finish the Vault of Glass. I was in my clan's first attempt, but my gear wasn't strong enough to prevail. I could do no damage to enemies. By the time I had finally been lucky enough to have a high enough light level, the next DLC was already out, and getting a group together to go was always a hassle. Like I said, I get anxious playing with strangers, and communication is key during a raid. Looking up randoms on the internet honestly stressed me out. But those times I was able to explore were a renewal of what I loved in the base game. I can't start talking about the expansion pass without feeling like I was ripped off. In general, it felt like content that should have been in the game at launch. Certainly not $20 each. Both reused locations and assets from the main game, and neither brought a lot of new content. No new planets or classes. The first expansion was The Dark Below. A few short missions were added along with a new vendor. The only thing of real note for this one was the new raid, Crota's End. This was a pretty fun romp. While not as cerebral as the Vault of Glass, it was still hard, and made use of Crota's Blade, a unique weapon that appeared only once in the base game. I was able to finish this raid, and even could solo the first part. The second expansion was the House of Wolves. This one brought back the bounties from the Queen's Wrath that I enjoyed. Also, weapons and armor progression were simplified, so damage boosts in weapons were no longer necessary. This allowed players to pick up new weapons and use them, as opposed to leveling them up through a period where they were useless. While there was no new raid, there was a new wave survival mode called the Prison of Elders, as well as a new competitive PvP mode called the Trials of Osiris. I didn't really care for either mode, but they were welcome. Overall, it was better than Dark Below, but still felt underwhelming. That same week House of Wolves was released. A new $40 DLC was announced, The Taken King. At this point, I was getting burnt out. I had played nearly once a week until the House of Wolves. The lackluster DLC, the constant unnecessary rebalancing, the unkept promises of patching the game's problems, and now Bungie was asking for even more money? I was done. Occasionally I would get on, but for the most part, I had other games to play. When The Taken King came out, I got back on and realized a major problem the series had all along. While there were some nice changes to the base game, like quests, suddenly I was locked out of things from the base game. I could no longer purchase gear using the marks I had saved up. Hard mode was no longer an option I could choose, so I was only able to play missions in an underwhelming difficulty. Destiny catered to those who pay. I had not bought the new DLC, so now I couldn't progress my character anymore, not even to what the old max was. They also changed the gear progression back to pre-House of Wolves, meaning it required more experience to level up. Destiny was a time bomb, and you had to pay to push the timer back. I wondered if it was like this when the first expansion came out. Were there people who had lost access to the cool rewards they were working toward? At this time, my disc also stopped working. I don't know why. I've never had a Blu-ray stop functioning. I don't know if the DLC had anything to do with it, but I was done trying. I realized that there would always be another DLC, and I would need to keep paying to put more time on the clock. And then my friend bought the DLC for me. Like magic, after purchasing The Taken King, my disc worked again. I have to say, The Taken King was a proper expansion. Finally, a new zone in the Dreadnought, new subclasses, new PvP modes. We are finally getting new things. Unfortunately, I was only able to play through the story before my disc started having problems again. But I really did enjoy what I played. I thought about purchasing the game digitally to avoid any further disc issues. When I looked at the digital storefront, I was confused to see the only product available was Destiny, The Taken King. This version included all 3 expansions and the base game for $60. While this was beneficial for new players, I already owned everything. Destiny had once again become a bomb and was asking me to overpay again. I didn't want to risk another disc not working, so my only option was to buy the game for $60 again. The Taken King was good, but not that good. I didn't pick it up again. I've heard Rise of Iron wasn't bad. Once again, with its release in the digital store, Destiny The Taken King changed to Destiny The Collection, retaining its price. I had let the bomb explode, and now it would be $90 to get back in and try what was new. I passed. I have mixed feelings about Destiny 2. I played the beta, and it was probably the worst beta I've ever seen. Only 2 missions and 1 PvP map. Well, this time I really hope I didn't play a fourth of the game. However, This short time playing it reminded me how good the moment-to-moment gameplay was. If the collection had been on sale, I would have bought it that week. What the beta did not do, however, was calm my worries for Destiny 2. While I'm optimistic that Destiny 2 will be a good game, I'm worried that they are throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I'm worried that the story will overwhelm the missions. I'm worried that the entire focus will be on this story that so many complain about needing, and that missions will be less replayable as a result. In the beta, Guardian skill trees were much less customizable, mainly filled with small modifications. I'm worried the skill customization I praised from the first game will be removed in favor of a more balanced PvP. I'm bothered that 6 vs 6 is gone, and that definitely means I won't be getting my big maps back. Most of all, I'm worried that there won't be enough new. A lot of what has been announced feels like retreading old ground. No new classes announced, no new races. The subclasses are very similar to the first games, and we start with 2, like the first game. 4 planets have been announced. Technically, 2 planets and 2 satellites. An expansion pass was already announced early on, including 2 DLC packs. It's just weird how much is exactly the same. I'm worried that Bungie is trying to remake the first game, rather than moving forward. I'm optimistic for Destiny 2. I hope that it is filled with imagination. I hope that it is fun to explore. I hope there's enough to sink my teeth into for months to come. This time, however, I won't be afraid to let the time run out if there is lackluster DLC. This time, I won't pay for more disappointment. Let's see whether or not the Destiny experience is worth continuing.